The New York Rangers have actually won 3 of their last 4. Are they ready to bounce back? Chik of Locked On Rangers is here to talk about that and what it'll take for the Rangers to get back to the playoffs. All that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. You could start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On New York Rangers, Chik. And John, finally, a little winning streak here. 3 of the last 4 for the Rangers. What's been different?
Well, the short answer for that is literally everything. Just about every aspect of hockey that you can think of, the Rangers have improved upon it over the last 2 weeks. I think maybe that holiday break did them some good as well. Now, granted, they did lose their first 2 games coming out of said break, but they've overall been giving you a much more honest effort recently, and it just feels like they've kind of found themselves. The last handful of games in particular, they look a lot more like the team that we saw last season. But if I could point to one thing, I mean, we could literally talk about all day about all the things that they're doing better. But I think the biggest thing now is just better overall team defensive hockey. You know, they came out of that break there, and they started scoring some goals, so they started to find themselves offensively a little bit, but the defense was still a little bit lacking. Now, when you're watching, you know, this win against Vegas, this win against the Devils before that, even the Blackhawks game this past weekend, the theme is just better overall team defense. The Rangers early in the season were absolutely just bleeding odd man rushes against, and they're not good at defending them either, so that's obviously not a good combination. The amount of like turnovers and just overall just bad play in the defensive zone was just frankly unacceptable, and just really surprising to see that come from a team that, you know, last year had the best record in the NHL in the regular season. So they've really tightened that up. A lot of individual defensemen have stepped up recently. I think you look at a couple of the new D-men, Vakanainen and Borgen, the two of them seem like they're settling in a little bit, especially Borgen. He was awesome against Vegas. But yeah, man, it's really pretty much everything. But I think there's nothing more important than what I just said, you know, the defensive aspect of the game being a lot better for the Rangers.
How did this team get off to such a bad start? How do you go from President's Trophy to last place in the Metropolitan Division with mostly the same roster?
Well, everything looked okay at first, you know, the really early parts of the season. They came out and they were pretty good. I think they were 5-0-1, but then everything fell apart just as quickly, to your point, Gil. And, you know, combination of things, it's strange. Like, there were just nights where it felt like there was just not really any sense of urgency. I can remember a 4-game road trip early in the season. They won the first 2. Then they lost to Calgary, didn't really play that well. And then against Edmonton, like, they come out, and I'm expecting them to bounce back and come out with their heads on fire and just a very lethargic performance. And that's when I started thinking, like, you know, something's wrong around here. You look at, you know, maybe the locker room was a little bit unstable because you had all the Jacob Trouba trade rumors in the offseason. Then he ultimately does get traded. I know some players weren't happy about the way that Barclay Goodrow was handled. He was, of course, placed on waivers, claimed by the Sharks. And then that memo that went out saying that the Rangers were open for business and we might trade Trouba, we might trade Kreider. So everything was kind of, I don't know what the word is, just kind of chaotic, I guess is the best thing you can say. And, you know, in a way, a team is the sum of all of its parts. And when you look up and down the roster for, you know, 2 months there, every single player had regressed from last season. Like, every single player, other than Will Cooley, on this roster was better last season than they were this season. And in some cases, maybe that still is what's going on here, but things are starting to turn. A lot of individual guys are playing better. Lindgren's played a lot better recently. He was under fire from Ranger fans. Mika Zibanejad, nobody's caught more flack, and I include myself in this, from Ranger fans than he has. But he's been a lot better recently too, you know, playing in all 3 zones like he's known to do, and has a nice little 6-game point streak going on as well. So team is the sum of all of its parts, and the parts weren't very good for that chunk that they were going through there. Everybody's struggling at the same time.
Who do you blame? Is this on the GM, the coach, the players? Obviously, there's a combination, but like, where do you primarily place the blame? It just seems like the ingredients were similar, but the soup didn't taste good.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good analogy, and I think that's pretty spot on. I think that works here. Um, if I was going to rank those things, I would say it's on the players first, because at a certain point, like, yeah, Drury, I think sometimes does kind of lose track of the human aspect of this thing, and maybe the situation with Trouba in the offseason could have been held better. Maybe the same thing can be said for, Barclay Goodrow, essentially forcing him out of town. But at the same time, these guys are pro athletes, and players get traded, players get waived. I mean, this is not exclusive to the 2024-2025 Rangers. This has been happening for years and years, not just with the Rangers, but with every team and across all sports as well. So at a certain point, like, yeah, you could be mad about it for maybe a day or two, but man, eventually you got to suck it up and get back out there and do your job. And I think it's, for that reason, it's mostly on the players. After that, I would say maybe Drury is next most to blame. The last calendar year or so has not been great for Drury. I think he's had a good amount of really smart, really savvy moves that he's made as GM of the Rangers, but kind of a tepid trade deadline this past year when they're in position to maybe win it all. They didn't really do a whole lot there. And then all the aforementioned drama of this past offseason as well with Trouba and with Goodrow. So I think he would be second. And Laviolette, I mean, he's hanging in there, and it seems like he's finally got these guys, battling out of this. I wouldn't say he's blameless. No coach ever is when their team loses as much as the Rangers were, but I'd put him at the bottom of the list as far as most to blame. I think he's the least of all three of those parties.
So the Eastern Conference, the bottom half is wide open. The last two wild card spots, maybe even possibly third place in the Metro, kind of out there for the taking. Can the Rangers climb back into a playoff spot, and what do they need to do, let's say at the trade deadline, in order to get there?
Yeah, I think for sure. To your point, Gil, I mean, I know that, the kind of like the middle portion of the Eastern Conference right now, it's really bunched up. There's just a boatload of teams within a couple of points of each other. But the Rangers are right there. And honestly, all it takes is one, solid stretch of winning hockey, and you'll kind of leapfrog some of these teams. It can look daunting with so many teams there, but you're one hot streak away from starting to climb right back up and maybe even get past a wild card spot, maybe even get back into the top three in the division. I think it's at least possible. As far as the trade deadline, I mean, the Rangers themselves are going to be the ones I think that do the most to determine what the approach is going to be there. Because if they can get themselves between now and then back into a playoff position, even if it is the second wild card spot, I think the Rangers will push forward. I think you will see them with some cap space now available to them. I think you'll see them add to the team at the trade deadline. But, if they falter again and if things start to go south, then the opposite could happen. You could see them sell off a Riley Smith or a Ryan Lindgren or, Will Borgen. I mean, I know he just got here, but he's a UFA at the end of the season too. And I think I'm getting to the point where I'd like to see Borgen extended. He's really done a nice job. But, yeah, man, it's all in the hands of the players. If they play well and they give this front office reason to believe, then I think they'll add. If not, though, if they're on the outside looking in, then I think you'll at least see them sell some of these guys that are UFAs at the end of the year and maybe open up some spots for some of the prospects that the Rangers have. Brett Berard could be back up. Brian Hoffman, I think we'll see him at some point this season too. So, yeah, man, it's all up to the players and how they perform between now and then.
So if they do add, what are they looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I would have said if you talked to me as recently as a week and a half ago, I would have looked at defensemen for sure. But that group's kind of settling in pretty nicely right now, to the point where Zach Jones can't even get a game. I mean, he's been a healthy scratch for at least 10 games in a row at this point, I think. And that's a whole nother story in and of itself. You'd like to see him crack the lineup every once in a while. But, you can always see somebody get added as far as a forward is concerned, maybe a top 9 kind of guy. They just claimed Arthur Kaliev off of waivers, but I don't think that's the big move that they would do. I think a forward with, a certain amount of grit, good forechecking kind of forward would be nice. We'll see. It's a ways off, but I think you could see them adding, one defenseman and one forward if I had to take a guess at it, and if they are in position to buy, like we were talking about.
All right. Well, I know it'll be an interesting second half of the season. John, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah. So YouTube, I mean, you can obviously watch the podcast there, or basically any audio streaming platform that you can possibly think of. The show will be available there as well. And you can find me on Twitter at JChik17, JCHIK17.
All right, John, thanks so much.
Thanks, Gil. Appreciate it.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are just better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. And it's not just the NFL playoffs. Hockey fans, use your knowledge of the game of hockey and your favorite team to get exciting opportunities on FanDuel. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com, FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.